Hi, I'm Mike Clark with Paul Reed Smith Guitars, and I'm here with everybody at Wildwood Guitars. And it was funny because I have talked to Steve quite a few times before, but no real in-depth conversations. Sorry about that. And we went to dinner last night. It was funny. Dinner last night and breakfast this morning, and Steve and Joe and I started talking about our influences and, of course, how we got into this industry. And I always mention that I'm what happens when your musical career goes south, you know, and you're forced to look at your future when, you know, you no longer look as good as you did in parachute pants or, you know, whatever. That was probably telegraphing my particular case there. But, and it was really funny because all three of us grew up on opposite ends of the country, but our influences was all funny. It's funny how when we sit and talk, and we've all been influenced by a lot of the same people, and a lot of people that nobody really knew about, you know, that weren't, you know, top 40 or recording hit albums, but had a huge impact in music and on our lives. It kind of got me thinking about why I got into this. And, you know, certainly nobody at 5 years old goes into kindergarten and goes, you know, I want to be a salesman. That's just not really something that, if it does, you know, there's probably a signal there for some kind of counseling or something that's needed. But we're in a great industry, and I'm fortunate that I'm able to go all over the country and talk with a lot of, we've had just incredible conversations about amplifiers, about guitars, about music, about inspiration. And, you know, in designing amplifiers and designing guitars, it's really funny, but what music means to a person, their reason for buying a guitar may be different, but the impact is the same. Whether you're, you know, in a corporate job, and basically what helps you at the end of the day is picking up that guitar and strumming. It's not how good you are. It's not how accomplished you are. In fact, it's funny. We were talking about careers as a musician, and we've all had spent a good portion of our life trying to make our mark in the music business, whether through records and touring or whatever. And the thing that's really funny is that I have a son that races motorcycles, and he's since retired, and I quit playing for 15 years while he was doing that, because when you take something you love and you try to make a living at it, it tarnishes it, you know, because you end up associating something that you would associate with just great times in your life. You have to start associating it with low points too. So I consider myself very lucky to be able to work for a company like Paul Reed Smith and Paul Reed Smith Guitars and Amplifiers. And it's a great group of people. I've known Paul since 1985. I was playing with a guy in Texas named Bugs Henderson. And it's funny, this guy showed up and he had this guitar and we'd never seen it, and he broke a string and he needed a new one. And Bugs said, well, what gauge do you need? And he said, I need a 9. And Bugs looked at him and with just a straight face said, we floss with 9s in Texas. And Paul, you know, didn't know how to respond, and it forged a friendship that continues to this day. And it's really funny, I look back and wonder how I ended up here with Paul, and it was a lot of different situations. I then ended up, you know, I quit playing and went to work in retail, and worked really hard, and then became a rep, then went to work for Gibson, and I had worked for Paul before, and then I've been with PRS for going on 12, 13 years now. But it's really important that we understand what music means to us. And, you know, it's neat listening to Steve talk to his salespeople and talking with the salespeople, and that they really go the extra mile to find out. When you open that case, there may be different reasons as to why one person likes that guitar or why they buy it, but the effect is the same. And the reason for buying it and the feeling that makes them buy that is the same. And we're very fortunate to be able to do that. You know, I grew up in an area in Texas that was very fertile for music. I was fortunate enough to go and be able to hear Stevie Ray Vaughan before anybody knew who he was, and Eric Johnson when he was a band called the Electromagnets. And there was a thing in Texas called the Texas Tornado for guitar, and I was fortunate enough to win that in 1983. And there were guys like Bugs and a lot of people, and I think in 83 I was probably 21 and extremely cocky and thought, man, you just can't get much better than this on guitar, you know, and I really believed that. And I thought that, you know, I was going to create this, I was going to have a huge impact on music. And I went down to a place one day and I'd heard about this guy, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and I thought, you know, really, how good can he be? And there was a place called Lee Park, and not only was it just mind-numbing, the power, which is one thing I think Texas guitar players really have. It's almost a street fight. There's a power and an emphasis that's put on notes, whether it be Bugs Henderson or Stevie Ray or Eric Johnson or any number of people that you've never heard of. My current favorite, we talked about this, I think one of the most incredible guitar players in the world is Doyle Bramhall too, and he's the complete package. He can sing, he can play, and he writes great tunes. And he's the king of subtlety, of soul. And the thing that I learned along the way is that you could play 1,000,000 miles an hour, but what you can't compete with is that one or two notes that just tear your heart out. And anyway, so I showed up at Lee Park and I saw these people here to see this guy, and he was cool. I mean, he was the coolest guy. He was just, man, he was incredible. And he was playing through a really funky gear. He did have his, you know, his number one Strat, but the thing that was really neat about players in Texas, old school players, but I don't consider myself old school because I came along at another time. These guys could plug into any amplifier with any guitar, any action. They were 2 guys to 1 amp, and it still sounded incredible. And I'm sure it was true that way around the country. But so I see Stevie, and it was definitely an incredibly humbling experience for anybody that played guitar, because he possessed something that you couldn't compete with, and it was power and soul. And I think I read later on where Jeff Beck said he was the most intimidating guy to play with on stage. But we were sitting here talking, those were my influences. I actually went to school with Freddie King's kids, and Freddie King played an assembly for us. And again, I would encourage you to go to YouTube and look for these Freddie King videos from the Sugar Bowl. And it's like, I just don't think they make music like that anymore. And the power of the band and the power of, you know, it wasn't just about guitar, it was about music. And I know I talked to Steve, and he was talking about the things that were going on the West Coast. And Joe was talking about things that were going on in Chicago. And everywhere it was just incredibly fertile. And that's why we got into it, because we saw ourselves in those people. And, you know, I went to that concert that day as a extremely cocky 21-year-old, and I left a humbled guitar player that finally really thought I figured out the meaning of what a real guitar player was. And it may be different to each person. It may be, you know, a guy that can play 1,000,000 miles an hour. You know, there was Dimebag Darrell was another player from Texas, but it's amazing that he played all different kinds of styles. Andy Timmons is another guy that lives in Texas now. Andy's probably one of the most versatile guitar players, and he lives probably 5 minutes from me. And So I'm fortunate enough to be able to have my ass kicked by those guys on a weekly basis, you know, and it makes you better as a player, hopefully. But I don't really know why we're doing this video, but it's just, you know, I'm lucky to be in this business. I guess it tells you a little bit about me. But I think it tells you more about why we were all into music. And I'm really fortunate to be able to make a living doing this. And whatever guitar does for you, just use it, you know? I know I could speak for a lot of us that it's kept us sane, relatively sane. Have a good day.